Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here, that's our theme song in the background, but today's topic is a little different, so let me go to my quadraphonic stereo here and take the needle off the record and slip something else on, a little different piece of vinyl. There we go. That's the Playboy theme. It opened Playboy After Dark and Playboy's Penthouse, two amazing television shows from the late 50s and the late 60s. Hugh Hefner displaying the Playboy culture on camera, and it was all part of Hef's master plan, with part of the magazine as well, to show the reader the Playboy lifestyle. He chose that name for a reason. It's a great example of the cocktail generation, and I understand that looking back now, and this pendulum has certainly swung, you can look back at Playboy and just look at the centerfolds and just look at the nude pictures and think that's it. But frankly, the Playboy magazine and the Playboy experience was far beyond that. And we've got an author today, Patty Farmer, who's going to talk about it. Patty was on a couple of years ago and talked about her first book about the Playboy culture. It was called Playboy Swings, and music like this was a big part of it. The magazine started in the pre-rock and roll era, and Hef was a big jazz freak, and jazz was a huge part of Playboy. So in that first book, Patty discusses the relationship of Playboy and jazz, the start of the magazine, and also the start of the Playboy Clubs, and the great jazz musicians that played at the clubs. There's a new book now called Playboy Laughs, and it delves further into the magazine's history and also the club's history. On the club side, it's a look at the stand-up comedians that came through the Playboy Clubs. And as you probably know, especially if you're a fan of this show, the late 50s, there was a real change as far as the style of comedy. Sketch comedy suddenly came out with Nichols and May, and also great stand-up comedy from the likes of Lenny Bruce and Mort Saul and Bob Newhart. Very different people, but doing more slice-of-life stuff. That Take My Wife Please joke book era of stand-up comics was giving way to these news people that were really taking a look at society. And that's what Playboy did as well. And again, get past the nudes and think about some of the essays, articles, book adaptations that were going on. The top writers, Alex Haley, Arthur C. Clarke, Ian Fleming would serialize James Bond books in Playboy. Great exposure, a great representation of that Mad Men culture. And certainly the clubs were no exception to that. So we talk about that with Patty and get into the Playboy club culture as far as the comics go. And speaking of comics, of course, cartoons, illustrations were very much a part of Playboy. And the history of Playboy cartooning goes hand in hand with the history of comic books. Because Playboy came at that same time that cartoonists were being chased out of comic books because of the Kefauver Commission. And wasn't it Kefauver? Maybe I'm confusing myself, but you know, the Senate hearings about juvenile delinquency being tied to comics. Comics kind of got dumbed down, and really for a kid's audience at that point moving on. But a lot of great comic book golden age creators jumped over to Playboy and did a lot of impressive work. And I'm talking about guys like Jack Cole, the creator of Plastic Man. So many of the artists and writers that made magazine great. And in fact, Hef really tried to institute a separate humor magazine. We're going to talk about that with many of the Mad creators. Pretty interesting conversation with Patty Farmer about all that history, and she's got great stories in the book. We get a little bit out of her in terms of what's coming up in Volume 3 of her Playboy history, but this was a delightful conversation about the history of stand-up during the Playboy Club years, which was a really important part of the evolution of stand-up comedy. In that precursor to the comedy clubs of the 70s and 80s and even today. There was a time when really Playboy was a lifeline to comedians and cartoonists, and it's all laid out in Playboy Laughs, the new book from Patty Farmer. So it's a pleasure to talk to Patty today. It's a great book. I can't recommend it enough, and I'm happy to share this conversation with you on Word Balloon today. It's brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you, League, for the support through Patreon, through wordballoon.com. When you come there, Word Balloon is free. It will always be free. But if you want to help the cause out and help sponsor Word Balloon each month, a donation to Patreon would be great. Patreon.com/wordballoon. That's where my Patreon page is. There's an ad for it and a link that will take you directly there if you click on it at wordballoon.com. But thank you very much. I just came back from San Diego a couple of weeks ago, and I can't do it without the support of the League of Word Balloon listeners. So thank you very much, League, for your support, and I hope you're enjoying the entertainment that I try to provide to you each week. Word Balloon is also brought to you by In Stock Trades at InStockTrades.com. They're, speaking of Playboy, one of the experiments that Hefner did with cartooning was a magazine called Trump. We talk a bit about it in my conversation with Patty, and if you want to experience it yourself, Dark Horse last year put out, it was Volume 2 of their Essential Harvey Kurtzman collection. It's the complete collection of Trump. It's the 2 magazines that they were able to put out 60 years ago. Crazy. Trump magazine only lasted in 1956 and 57. I guess apparently they only had 2 magazines, but they did, in this collection, they include the 3rd issue, which is pretty amazing. Listen to the creators beyond Harvey Kurtzman that contributed to Trump. Will Elder, Al Jaffe, Jack Davis, Mel Brooks, Arnold Roth, Russ Heath, Wally Wood. There's an essay and annotations by Dennis Kitchen. It's an incredible volume, and I think it's a wonderful compliment to my conversation today with Patty. And you really need to check it out because it's very cool humor that these guys did outside of EC Comics and Mad Magazine. But it's 45% off, and it's just $16.49 from InStockTrades.com. Can't recommend it enough, and can't recommend Playboy Laughs enough. So among the great values that you can find at In Stock Trades, there's one in particular that dovetails into today's conversation. You'll find great comics, great graphic novels, great books about comics at great prices at InStockTrades.com. Okay, so let's get into this conversation now. Before we start with Patty, I have a relative, because I kind of wanted to comb through my own memories of Playboy as a kid, and yes, I was one of those kids that, I had my uncle's copies, my dad, I don't remember ever seeing my father's copies of Playboy magazine, but I had a couple uncles that had Playboy, and every now and then they'd accidentally leave it around in the den or something like that. So I remember in the early 70s, rifling through Playboy at an age I probably shouldn't have. But also, the Playboy Clubs, the first one was based in Chicago, my hometown. The Playboy building was a long feature of Chicago's Loop skyline. And not only was the Playboy Club in Chicago a big deal, but in those days before airline travel became really inexpensive and anyone could go anywhere, much like the Catskills relationship to New York City, Wisconsin, and in particular Lake Geneva, was a really nice getaway by car for Chicago people to go north and relax and have a little more open space and appreciate the land up there. And they Hefner built a Playboy Club in Lake Geneva that had an incredible golf course, beautiful hotel, this incredible resort. It's still there. It's called the Grand Geneva Resort now. And it pretty much is still the skeleton of what was the Playboy Club in Lake Geneva. But, there aren't many of my father's and uncle's generations left. I luckily am the baby as far as my first cousins go, so I went through our ranks and stuff. I do know that my father and my sister and mother and my grandfather took a trip to Jamaica and stayed at a Playboy resort down there, and great pictures of my grandfather, although I don't have them, or I'd put them up on the website, of my 80-something-year-old grandfather standing next to a Playboy bunny. And it's hilarious. And great entertainment, great music, great stand-up comedians. The Professor Irwin Corey, who comes up in the conversation, who just passed away and actually made it to the age of 100. He entertained at the Playboy Club when my father and my family saw them there. And my family. I don't think Pam was allowed to go to the club, obviously. But my grandfather, mother, and father were all there in attendance. And as I say, I'm like kind of the runt of the family, the baby, as far as the other cousins go. But I spoke to one of my older cousins, Joe Renna, who is one of those Mad Men executives that was doing business back in the day and would go to the Playboy Clubs, both the Chicago Club and the Lake Geneva Club. So I wanted to get a first-hand account of what it was like being at the Playboy Clubs at the peak of their relevance and popularity. So here's a short conversation with Joe Renna telling us about the experience of a guy who went to the Playboy Club a couple times. And I think you're going to appreciate his point of view on it. Here's Joe Renna now on Word Balloon. Joe Renna, welcome to Word Balloon. I appreciate you talking to me about your memories of the Playboy Club.
Well, John, you have to understand at the time, Hugh Hefner did everything even above first class. And he had, the hottest girly magazine, for lack of a better term.
Sure.
But few people realized that he had great authors writing great articles in the magazine. That's number one. He had, he went public. He had the Playboy Clubs in major cities across the country. So not only all the revenue from the magazine, but the revenue from the clubs. So he decides to build this incredible resort in Lake Geneva. And, let me just say this. Unlike these horrible girly clubs and strip joints today, the bunnies were dressed appropriately. It was class.
I hear you.
There was no lap dancing or nothing like that.
Sure.
The food was incredible. Everything about it, the best wines, the best liquors. The golf course was to die for. I mean, it was, as far as baseball parks, it rivaled the Yankee Stadium.
I hear you.
So the whole thing he did, everything about it was class.
Well, that's why they called it Playboy. He wanted to promote this upper-class lifestyle of recreation and fun. And, the whole idea of these key clubs, that was, I guess, a really big phenomenon, and obviously before my time. But, were you aware of any other sort of, exclusive clubs like the Playboy style?
Yeah, there were a few. Even in Chicago, we had the Gaslight Club.
Yes.
They tried to do a similar thing. They had the girls dressed with, push-em-up bras and stuff like that. Sure. But it didn't even come close.
That's really cool.
It didn't come close to rival the whole mood that he created. It was a great escape for guys who wanted to go away for a weekend, go up there and stay for, a Friday, Saturday night and play golf, and then go to the club and drink and enjoy yourself, and you didn't have to worry about driving. You didn't, it was
Sure.
it was a very, very classy joint.
Do you remember any jazz acts or comedians that you saw at the various Playboy clubs?
No, I honestly,
okay.
I don't remember any, to be honest with you. But he again, he put a lot of young comedians, especially black comedians.
Yes,
he put them on the map.
Yeah,
I mean, Bill Cosby being one of them.
Sure. The author that I just spoke to, Patty Farmer, she was talking about Dick Gregory really breaking through because of the Playboy Club, and had a big Time magazine article about him, and really became this national sensation.
Flip Wilson was another one.
Sure.
So yeah, it really, really, it's too bad of what has happened. Today, you couldn't do it. Today, guys go to those clubs and they're there to fool around and see naked girls, and it's just a whole different ball game. And they would go to places like that instead of going to a Playboy Club.
I hear you. Did you watch Playboy After Dark or the Playboy Penthouse, the television shows that Hef was making in the late 50s and early 60s?
Occasionally.
Okay.
Occasionally. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah.
I didn't go there a lot. Don't get me wrong. I mean,
I understand.
I occasionally would go to the club downtown, and maybe at best 3 or 4 times up to Lake Geneva.
Got it. No, I'm surprised, and it was the Lake Geneva story was really interesting that he sunk so much money into that. That club in particular, he ended up having to sell it. I know in the late '60s, and it's still there. It's the Grand Geneva now. So it still exists. But I guess I was just talking to a friend. He said that there's really no representation of what it was when it was the Playboy Club as far as any memorabilia or photographs or anything on display there, which is a shame because it's kind of a historic place, and certainly the old Playboy Club as well. Were you like the various rooms, the library room? Did you kind of check out all the different little nooks and crannies?
Oh yeah. I did the tour. I had a buyer at Weebles.
Okay, old department store for people who may not know. Yes.
Yeah, he was and no pun intended, a real schnorr, and he loved to be wined and dined and entertained, and he liked to play golf. So it was a nice way to entertain a guy that was giving me a lot of business. But it was class. It really was.
Did you watch that TV show Mad Men, Joe? Because that kind of represents that era of executives and recreation.
Yeah, we watched a few sessions. Laurie and I did.
What'd you think?
It got kind of boring after a while.
Well, you lived it, man. So you're like, yeah, whatever.
Oh, I did live it. There's no question about it. I did live it.
I understand, man.
It was it was just the way it was in those days.
Sure.
I mean, there's no getting around it. Buyers love to be entertained, and it was the way you did business.
I understand, and truly, like you said, it was a class operation, and it made people there feel like they were living that Playboy dream that was represented in the magazine.
Exactly.
Very cool. No, I appreciate your memories, Joe. Thanks a lot, man. This is a good addition to the conversation with Patty. Thanks for talking to me.
Okay, John. Talk to you later, buddy.
Okay, that was my cousin Joe Renna, and I appreciate his thoughts on the Playboy experience. And now we transition to the author, Patty Farmer. Again, Playboy Swings, her first book. Incredible if you're a jazz fan and if you're a fan of 50s through 80s culture. I mean, really, she takes us to the modern age because the Playboy Clubs have had a renaissance. And currently in London and Tokyo, as I remember from our first interview, there are Playboy Clubs again. But this conversation and the bulk of Playboy Swings was about the heyday of the Playboy Clubs, the entertainment you could get there. And this new volume, Playboy Laughs, no exception. Such a great book, incredible interviews with the stand-up comedians that were popular during the Playboy Club heyday, but also the cartoonists that you will recognize if you're a comic book history fan, and they're an important part of Playboy's culture. So it's really great to have this opportunity to have Patty Farmer back on a new episode talking about the Playboy culture now on Word Balloon. Patty Farmer, welcome back to Word Balloon. It's really a pleasure to talk to you again, and congratulations on the second book on the history of Playboy.
Oh, thank you, John. I love any opportunity to talk to you, number one, and your listeners, and especially to talk about Playboy.
There was really great interest in our first interview that really covered Playboy's history with jazz, Playboy Swings, and this book now, Playboy Laughs. This is doubly exciting for me because I'm a big comedy nerd, and I'm also a big cartoonist nerd. And it's wonderful how these two subjects dovetail into the history of Playboy. And so really, honestly, you hit the sweet spot. This is really fun.
Glad to hear that.
So, Hefner was always at the vanguard of all the new things that were happening, and certainly in the 50s. And hand in hand with his love of jazz, he was there at the beginning of the cultural shift in stand-up comedy from the old Borscht Belt, Henny Youngman guys to this new group that came in the 50s, people like Lenny Bruce and Shelley Berman. And that's, again, what a visionary to see this is where things were going.
Absolutely. And I think he and Playboy, of course, served as a bridge almost from that era up into the 70s and 80s when they started having the comedy clubs and the improvs. The Playboy circuit was a huge, important part of the culture and the nurturing and giving these great artists, a platform to work at. People like Jerry Van Dyke said if it wasn't for Playboy giving him a weekly paycheck and putting him on the circuit and letting him play out in Des Moines, to get his timing down and practice working in front of an audience, he wouldn't have been ready when that opportunity came to move up to the next level.
No question. And there are some amazing stories in here. And again, I think timely as far as where things were going in society. Irwin Corey and Dick Gregory's connection and how that was a big game changer in comedy. I know that's one of the stories you cover in the book.
Right. And that's one of the iconic stories on a couple different levels. You know, Hef opened up the Playboy Clubs in February 1960 and in Chicago, of course. And he loved comedy. You know, he loved jazz. He loved comedy. That was, you know, just ingrained in him. And there was a wealth of talent to pick from in the local comedy clubs in Chicago. And he had actually met Irwin at one of the clubs, and they used to play poker together. So in addition to loving his comedy, and, you know, let's face it, Irwin Corey just, whether you like the guy or not, looking at him makes you laugh. And then when he opens his mouth, you're just, you know, gone. But he hired Irwin to play one of the clubs, the Chicago club, during the early months. And there was one time that Irwin didn't want to play. And he suggested Dick Gregory, who was a great black comic at the time. But, you know, it was also a time in our country where segregation laws were going on. But, you know, Hef never paid any attention to that and put Dick in front of not only a white audience, a completely white audience, but it was a bunch of... if I'm not wrong, I think it was meat packers or meat workers. I think it was meat packers from Alabama. So to listen to Dick tell it, you know, he couldn't let the fear show, but he just launched in. And the show's typically, you know, they're typical stand-up comedy routines, and they go, you know, half an hour, 45 minutes or so. And after a couple hours, Victor Lowndes went over to the mansion where Hef was and said, you know, you get in the car. I have to take you over to the club because you're missing history. And even by taking that time out, by the time he got back, these whatever they were, meat packers, wouldn't let Dick off the stage, you know, and you know what it's like, give a comedian an audience, and they don't ever want to get off the stage. So it was really, really something to see. And at one point, there was somebody from Time magazine at the Playboy Club. They caught Dick's act and they wrote about it. And, you know, it really launched Dick's career. He got the Jack Parr show and on and on. But he really gives Hugh Hefner credit. He got his star on the Walk of Fame 2 years ago. And one of the first things he said was, you know, I credit Hugh Hefner for breaking the color barrier and, you know, helping me stand here with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
It really opened the door for people like Cosby and others that followed that were so, you know, popular in the 60s. And yeah, really, you know, the Jackie Robinson of comedy, Dick Gregory. You know, it's an incredible story. And you have a lot of these great stories in Playboy Laughs. And I, you know, Hef was a big Lenny Bruce booster, and the sick humor movement that he and Mort Saul and some of these others, you know, represented. And again, it was where, you know, sophisticated comedy, the Take My Wife Please guys were welcome, I guess, as well at the clubs. But this was a new forum, and it was interesting that hand in hand with the club's evolution came this new comedy movement.
Absolutely. And, you know, the sick comedy, if you look at the list, because it was an actual list, my mind's drawing a blank right now who put out this list. But, I mean, it included people like Bob Newhart was on that list. And, you know, I question that, you know, Lenny Bruce, okay, Mort Saul, yes, I can get that. But Bob Newhart, and I've heard his older routines, you know, I didn't know why he was on the list, but he was. And, you know, Hef liked, it had an intelligence. It was, you know, really, you had to think about what Lenny was saying, and it was things that he had thought about, everyday things sometimes, but, it was the start of political humor, and Mort Saul, for sure, carried that through. And, unfortunately, Lenny was a sad story. We lost him in his, 40s, early 40s, right? And Hef did everything he could to help him. And unfortunately, I don't think anybody could have saved Lenny from himself. But,
seems that way,
yeah,
based on his history and everything. No, absolutely. And and for people who don't know, Lenny Bruce was charged with obscenity a lot at a time when this is before George Carlin's 7 dirty words you can't say on television, and the police were very strict about that, threw him in jail a lot, and have, as Patty says, really helped him out with court fees. And and also was just this guy representing mainstream culture, standing by this very controversial comedian. I mean, it stands with some of the comedy controversies of today, probably even more so because, again, the poor guy was thrown in jail for what he said.
Right. And John, I'm sure you know this, but maybe there was one or two of your listeners that doesn't, but they used to use the obscenity law against him for making fun of the Catholic Church. Nobody was immune to Lenny. He's Jewish, and he had a lot of things to say about his own religion and culture. But, Chicago, people think Chicago was run by the mob, and they came in second to the Catholic Church. So you'd have these cops that would go around to the clubs and say, if Lenny makes one more crack about the Pope or makes him the butt of one more of his jokes, we're going to close you down for, we're going to arrest him for obscenity charges, even though it's not what we think of today as obscenity. But we'll close the bar down, too. We'll pull your liquor license. So, it was really sad, what happened to Lenny Bruce. It was just a sad time. He was so funny, but maybe he was ahead of his time.
Agreed. And again, an inspiration to people like Carlin and Richard Pryor and the comedy movement that came in the 60s. And you've got great interviews with the comedians that were there, with other observers of the period. And, God, I'm really glad you got people like David Brenner before he passed away, because he really, I think, in both directions was a great, connection to the era before him and the era that came after him. And, again, a guy that really was paying attention to what was going on in the clubs and around him. Jimmy Walker, Larry Storch, for God's sake, in his 90s.
Oh, my gosh.
It's really great. And I'm glad, because this is, a really important chapter in comedy. Again, it was a game-changing time. And the Playboy Clubs as a tour circuit really represented, a path and a career for comedians that they could make a good income at a time really between, I don't even know, the supper clubs and the nightclub circuit, and then the comedy clubs of the 70s and beyond. Really the Playboy Club really helped a lot of people out, right?
Right, absolutely. It was, like I said, that bridge, that spanned those 2 decades before the improv and the comedy clubs started popping up, and a different kind of comedy club was presented. But again, the clubs of the later years, you didn't get a steady paycheck. You got the hat was passed around. You got a piece of the door, a lot of times. And the Playboy Clubs didn't pay a lot, but they paid steady. And, a lot of the folks went on to become household names, but there were a ton of other great comedians that just worked. That was their job. They were on the road 50 weeks out of the year and got paid for it, and did that their whole lifetime.
Sure. I remember Carlin doing a wonderful, long oral history interview for the American Academy of Television. And he really went into that period where he said, really, the Playboy Clubs provided a steady income because, you were on that circuit. And, how many clubs in the 60s were there across the country, or probably Canada as well, internationally?
Internationally, they, at the height of their popularity, it was 42. So you could work, if you had 2 weeks a year, 2 weeks at each club a year, that was your year. And George George was there in the beginning when he was a clean-cut college guy and showed up wearing a tie, and he perfected and kind of like you had mentioned, got to that stage where it was the 7 words you couldn't say on TV. And Hef, even though it was Playboy, and Playboy has, people have their own ideas of Playboy, Hef ran strict clubs. And he had to have the talk with George. He said, George, you're my good friend and I love you and you're always welcome in my clubs, but, I'm afraid you can't be on the stage anymore. You've outgrown us, so time to move on. And it was the same for Richard Pryor and a couple of the other folks, Red Fox, all these great guys, but they had to keep it clean at the Playboy Club.
Interesting. I love to, by the way, and I meant to congratulate you, love your participation in Hugh Hefner American Playboy, the Amazon Prime series. It's great. And it's great if people haven't seen it. It's half documentary and half drama. They dramatize the real events and then cut to you and other experts and Hef and members of the magazine and behind the scenes. And there's these great interview pieces intertwined with this great drama playing out. It's fantastic.
It was really good. And interestingly enough, Amazon had contracted with the producer for 6 series, his weekly series. And the producers went back and they said, we're having such a tough time. There's no way we can squeeze Hefner's life into 6 weeks. And without blinking an eye, they said, 13 weeks. And they expanded it to 13 weeks. And even that didn't cover this great man's life.
Understood. But, it's really great. And I love the, cutting back and forth from the drama and the real documentary interviews as well. Back to your book, though. Honestly, you're great on it. And I'm really glad you're a part of it. And I can't recommend it enough. I have Amazon Prime, so I was thrilled to see it. And, it's terrific. Great story. So... But regarding...
John, and Hef gave so many different, helped so many different groups. We had breaking the color barriers for the African Americans and helping start a lot of comedians on their path. And one major group, which is why I interrupted you, I was so excited that I remembered, was women. Phyllis Diller broke in and was given an audience on Playboy Penthouse and Joan Rivers. I had the great pleasure to sit down and talk to Joan Rivers and Lily Tomlin and Kay Ballard and Mimi Hines, and all these great funny ladies were happy to have Playboy around to help them and get them in front of an audience also.
Absolutely. And that was literally going to be the next thing I wanted to talk to you about. And you're right. I mean, and when we get to the magazine portion as well, that's the great part of, I think, Playboy's story that sometimes does get overlooked is the, fact that so many women succeeded on stage at the magazine as well. And, they were a big part of the Playboy story, and not just the bunnies, not just the centerfolds, but really working women and women that were respected for their minds and as well as their bodies.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with that.
No, honestly, I was really excited to see that you got to talk to Lily Tomlin. Again, another woman that is so important to the history of comedy and I think very well respected in the circles. It's great to see her still at it, in Grace and Frankie, the Netflix show. And she's still as funny as she was, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. True.
I totally agree with you there. I could watch her all day long, and the evolution, from, her early shows to, like you just mentioned, Grace and Frankie, just hysterical. I just have tears in my eyes watching her.
Absolutely. Well, another one of Hef's passions was cartooning, and I forget, and I'm glad you remind us in the book that Hef was himself a cartoonist, and in some of his earlier pre-Playboy college magazines, there was some Hefner art, and also early Playboy magazines, right?
Right. I mean, that's what he wanted to be, and many people don't realize, and lucky for us, he didn't succeed, but he wanted to be a cartoonist. He wanted to make his living with the great cartoonists of the day, people like Jack Cole and Arnie Roth and Al Jassy, and he wanted to be a cartoonist. Even coming out with his own cartoon, comic book in 1951. He had a full 74-page comic book came out. And gosh, I'm going to screw up the title. It's such a long title. It's called, I think, This Toddlin' Town, Chicago, Rowdy Burlesque of Manners and Mores. But I've read it. I've read every page, and it's funny, and he did a good job. But he just wasn't good enough to compete with the greats that were around during that era. That was another era of these talented artists who just decided to go into cartooning at that time instead of become, traditional artists. And so Hef went on to start up a men's magazine instead, second best in his mind. And I think he did a good job at that.
I think so, but he was also smart enough to hire some of those wonderful cartoonists. And Jack Cole is a golden age cartoonist, very respected in the comic industry because of his creation, Plastic Man. And it's so great that he had a tragic ending, unfortunately, sort of like Lenny Bruce, even a little more grisly. You might have said, in Bruce's case, it might have been an accident. But Cole really had this wonderful act, too, because it was right when comic books were, because of the Senate hearings, really dumbed down and really became more of a kid's medium. And thank God, Hefner and Jack Cole found each other, and Cole had this great Act 3, doing such wonderful cartooning for Playboy.
Yeah, definitely. And he actually moved to Chicago to be right around Playboy and be able to be there and be around Hef and work there. But, he was one of many. Shel Silverstein, Leroy Neiman, whose art hangs in museums around the world today. And when you think about it, John, it's not a bad gig. You get to hang around those Playboy offices, beautiful people, get paid for coming up with Femlins, which was Leroy's little girl. The Femlin was half girl and half little sprite or whatever you call it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a bad job at all. People absolutely loved it. Shel Silverstein, Arnie Roth, Al Jaffe,
yes,
who at 96 is still working for Mad Magazine.
Absolutely,
96.
Yep, doing the.
I visit with him.
The fold in, the back page issue, the opposite of the centerfold, the pull out centerfold. He innovated for Mad Magazine, the infamous fold-in gag. And yeah, like you said, 96 years old, still doing it every month. I saw several Mad Magazine people at Comic-Con last weekend, and we were talking about Al Jaffe. And you provide these wonderful biographical sketches of these cartoonists and the comedians as well, and get their observations when they were still living. People like Jules Pfeiffer. My God, what a Renaissance man that wrote films, Carnal Knowledge, and really important Broadway plays, and this master cartoonist in his late 80s, and still this incredible force going back to the 40s and 50s.
And it's funny you mentioned Carnal Knowledge. When I was talking to him, he just kind of off the cuff said, of course I got all my ideas for Carnal Knowledge from hanging around the Playboy Mansion. Because he was, not only worked for Playboy, he was a good friend of Hef's and, hung out with him at the mansion all the time. And that's where he got his ideas for Carnal Knowledge. Funny, I thought.
Absolutely. Cole kind of came up with, it seems, the template for the great artists that have followed in terms of those kind of New Yorker style cartoons that were the one panel gags, and again this level of sophistication to them that Matt, and I'm going to get into, we mentioned Al Jaffe and Mad Magazine. There's a lot of great Mad creators that work for Playboy, but again it's Mad and that era of 50s cartooning. These were like the daily shows of their day, these single panel gags, and as vital as any snide columnist that is, commenting on current society. And it's this great Mad Men era, but, really biting humor that, stood with the stand-ups and again, was really part of the important, or not, important maybe is getting highfalutin or something, but the relevant humor of 50s
Right.
and 60s society.
Right, absolutely. And I'm so happy that you said that because, you get 99 people that get it, and yet I've had a few that have said, why in the world did you include cartoons? And I'm like, I don't even know what to say to them. I'm like, obviously you don't know about them. So, really, really important culturally. And being Hef, he was definitely, everybody said, a micromanager, but they said they really valued his edits. But you have to kind of picture the process. They would submit a cartoon, and Hef would make his comments and send it back. But this is the day when you had to put things in an envelope and put a stamp on it and send it. And then, you'd send it from Chicago to, Al Jaffe in New York, and Al would open it up and look at the comments in the columns, and he'd make his adjustments and put it back in an envelope and, send it back to Chicago, and do this every single month for either a panel of cartoons or a cartoon. So much work went into it. It was really an art piece. And you have people like Doug Sneed, who, if you look at his art, and I've included a few examples in the book, I mean, they're just beautiful, beautiful artwork.
No question. And again, back to the group at Mad Magazine, when Harvey Kurtzner kind of got frustrated with Bill Gaines and it was time to leave Mad, Hef was more than happy to welcome Harvey, and in fact created a magazine that has a title that had a different meaning back in the 50s.
Oh my gosh. Trump magazine. There was the cartoon, comic book called Trump, and Hef wanted to make comic books a little bit upscale. Comic book paper at that time was like newspaper.
Yes.
That they bleed through, and he had a higher quality paper. And I love the line when Hef was questioned after they folded, because unfortunately, due to many reasons, but they folded after only 2 issues.
Yes.
And somebody asked Hef, what happened? And he said, I gave Harvey Kurtzman an unlimited budget, and he surpassed it. But he went and he took all the Mad guys with him.
Yes.
So, the Gaines was not happy about that, but Al Jaffe, needed to work, and so he eventually went back and said, I'll do anything. Take me back. And they did.
I know, I think it was Dark Horse Comics in the last year or two republished the 2 issues of Trump in a collection. And, it really is great. And Bill Shelley just wrote an amazing biography of Harvey Kurtzman's as well. And again, I mean, these are comic book gods, and certainly the gods of comic book humor. Jack Davis, another wonderful Mad creator that did stuff for Playboy. And in particular, Will Elder and Little Annie Fanny, which, again, was a big cultural revolution, a parody of Little Orphan Annie to a degree, but not really. It was its own thing. But if you would, can you talk a little bit about Little Annie Fanny? Little
Annie Fanny was, that was a group effort almost. Well, it was definitely, because this is a monthly magazine and everything has to be done fast, but it took so long, and each piece was like a full-on artwork, and they pulled in Arnie Roth and Al Jaffe and was it Davis also, I think,
Davis, yeah,
to work on it. And, it was just like an assembly line almost, to get this out every month. And a couple times in particular, Hef put them up at a hotel so they could just work on this piece. And they were New York guys. I should mention that they were in New York, and Playboy was in Chicago. And, they were ordering room service. And I mean, we don't have enough time to go into the stories about them being at the hotel, but I have them in the book.
Yes, you do.
And finally Hef said, it's taking too long, costing too much money, and I'm going to fly you out to the mansion. You have to finish it up here. And talk about spending too much money. He had a limousine take them to the airport, and they flew first class. And it was you just have to. You can almost put yourself into the stories and shake your head and say, what a crazy, crazy time. What a great time. But they got little Annie Fanny done.
You got some really great stories from guys like Al Jaffe about some of the mad guys, and they're having to share bathrooms with the playmates. We'll leave it at that, or the bunnies, I guess. That's great. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's a funny, funny story, and I'm not going to tell it. But Willie was he didn't like sharing with girls. Didn't like sharing the bathroom with girls. He thought they were just terrible. And the reasons are funny.
Absolutely, and they're in the book, Playboy Laughs. It's and also I want to acknowledge the women editors of the cartoon department, right?
Right. We had great women editors, Cynthia Maddox and Michelle. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking out right now. It's in the book.
It is in the book. Yes, forgive me. I don't have an opening to point at it. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just blanking on her last name, and I should not. She was very, very important. Everybody really respected her, and she nurtured and cared for the cartoonists individually a lot until she passed away from cancer, from eye cancer. And another woman took over, Amanda Warren, up until when Playboy made the questionable decision about not having cartoons in Playboy magazine anymore.
Well, the magazine in its current form, both digitally and on the stands and stuff, there have been some odd, choices that, you've been to, I guess, whatever society tells you is, what works and what doesn't. And maybe, cartoons are disappearing from newspapers. It's tough. And you're right. It is shocking because it was such an important part of the magazine. The pinup artists also get their due. And certainly the classics, like people like Vargas. But you also talk about a modern pinup artist, Olivia. Now I'm going to try and say her name right. Debaradinas?
I think that's why we just call her Olivia.
True. That's right. Of course, she only signs her stuff Olivia.
Even she and her manager, they say just Olivia. That's how we publicize it. So that's right. Vargas, he wasn't a cartoonist. He was one of our great pinup artists, illustrators. He was included, and he too, it was a third chapter of his life when Playboy came in and had these great Vargas girls, for lack of a better word, come and become a fixture in the Playboy magazine every month. And the audience just took to it like crazy. And, through the different evolutions, even through the wars, the wars have started having with Penthouse and Hustler and trying to compete with them. And Vargas, there are stories about how he had a little bit of a problem, taking his pinup illustrations that were on our boys' fighter planes and on calendars and kind of taking them to the next level in the men's magazine world. But there was him. And then when he passed, the torch was passed to Olivia, who is, of course, a female illustrator who works in the same style of Petty and Vargas. And she does amazingly beautiful work. There was a little bit of pushback. People weren't quite ready for a woman to, be able to draw that kind of humor. But she had definitely made a place for herself in that world and does a beautiful, beautiful job. She calls her work cheesecake, and we had a conversation about that, cheesecake or pinup, kind of the same thing, but just, absolutely gorgeous work.
Do you ever, in terms of touring with this book in particular, I always love that there are certain comic conventions and also pulp conventions and graphic art conventions like Spectrum that do kind of celebrate this kind of cover and also interior art. Is there any plans for your tour for this book to try and get in any shows like that? Because this is the kind of visual presentation that, always makes for a great panel when I see them at places like Comic-Con. And I would think what you're, representing in your book would be great.
I would love to go. You have to be invited or, pay to go. So I can't afford to go, and my publicist isn't paying my way. So anyone who wants to invite me, I will be there.
I'm telling you, honestly, and I know some of the Playboy artists do set up our Chicago convention, and I know a lot of the artists that did Playboy work were obviously also guys that were doing print ads for the ad agencies in Chicago, major hub for national and international agencies, the Mad Men hub. Chicago is certainly that as much as New York,
right.
And I just think if we got to make this happen. I know some convention people. I think that would really be great.
I agree with you. I would love that.
Yeah, we're gonna have to fire that up
because it is, the people like Olivia and again Doug Sneed.
Yes,
he makes the rounds there, and the Mad Guys. I think it all goes hand in hand.
I completely agree. Yeah, we'll see what we can do on that in the months ahead. What is your plan for your book tour?
Just the regular, talking to all. You great radio folks and your listeners, and book signings around the country, Barnes & Noble and small independent bookstores also, a couple conventions. I'm out in the Hamptons next weekend. I was invited to a big event out there for the Southampton Book Library, and they invited me, and I have Barnes & Nobles lined up for September around the country. So I'll be around, and I hope to meet some of your listeners.
Yes, I hope so, too. I hope they do come out to signings and also pick up Playboy Swings, which, again, is half about the clubs and certainly about the importance that Playboy played as far as the jazz world goes. And I think we spoke in our last interview about an issue of Playboy that I got, I want to say it was February of 1965. And I know that Kim Novak was on the cover, and they had a whole big story about the Beatles invading America in 1964. It was kind of a 1964 in review. And my most favorite part of the magazine was, ironically, the jazz section that featured, we mentioned Leroy Neiman, these beautiful Leroy Neiman portraits of so many jazz greats. And it was like a basketball or football, college basketball, like top 10 or top 25. And you had the top 10 trumpeters and the top 10 drummers, top 10 vocalists, every piece of the jazz orchestra represented. And these great sketches of, Sinatra's number 2, Mel Torme had a better year, and just that kind of great, analysis of the year in jazz, and I just adored it. Plus these incredible illustrations from Neiman of all these great jazz people.
Absolutely fabulous, and actually that was a Playboy poll. Those rankings, the magazine had put out and asked the readers to send in, who they thought was the top bassist and vocalist, et cetera, and it really mirrored who was, the number 1, number 2. But that was a great issue.
Well, and
definitely,
also,
and the artwork, amazing.
Agreed. And, again, I'm always fascinated by these societal cultures that crop up. We think that this kind of just started with the internet, but both with the clubs and the idea of the key clubs, and that Playboy was so important with that, and then also the entire Playboy culture and involving the fans in voting for your favorite jazz musicians and stuff. This was all pre-internet, and Hef was, assembling his subscribers as an active participant in the Playboy culture and wanted them to feel as much a part of it as they possibly could.
You're absolutely right. And again, it wasn't click here for, your favorite person. You have to really put yourself out there and fill out a form and find an envelope and address it and put a stamp on it. And mainly, I'd say 98% were men that were filling out this poll. So it was really engaging the audience, who wants to be a Playboy? All these men were actively engaged in the culture around them. Definitely.
The whole story of the Playboy phenomenon is really amazing, and you're doing a great job documenting it and getting these incredible interviews, assembling these great books. What can you tell us about the third book coming up? There's one more left, right?
There's one more in the Playboy Chronicles, and that's about the amazing writing. It's going to be Playboy Thinks. And again, Hefner hired only the very best in the writers and the editors, and this will cover that. You know, people like Ian Fleming, who wrote seven short Bond stories before they were made into movies, and Alex Haley before Roots. You know, and he had this thing when the interviews came into being. You know, the famous Playboy interviews, and he'd have great, interesting people interview interesting people. And he had Alex Haley interview, I think it was like the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. And he had said, when he agreed to the interview, he said he just didn't want to have to talk to any Jew. You know, so Hefner said, we can arrange that. And he says, Alex Haley. Of course, Alex Haley knew what he was going into. But, you know, that alone could take up a book. I mean, that was an amazing interview. But so anyway, I'm getting long-winded there, but that's the next one, stories like that.
That's fantastic. And, you know, of course, that's the joke. I buy Playboy, but I only buy it to read the articles. No, it's, well, and again, that was the great thing, really, from the start. And I think you even kind of allude to that in the first book as well, that it was really important for, you know, him to find these great pieces of fiction and also nonfiction essays from the greatest writers available. And they did. They all contributed to Playboy. And again, this was a time when, you know, it was still a reading society. And, you know, you make allusions as far as it in Playboy Laughs to The Daily Show and things like that. Yeah, these were touchstones. You know, people came to magazines to you know, learn about things culturally and a bit more than, you know, the current reading level of today's society. Maybe I'm being mean. I don't know. I know word balloon listeners.
No, I don't think so. It definitely tops How to Lose 10 Pounds in 72 hours.
Right. Or Snooki's
I saw that on the cover of a magazine today.
Yeah, or Snooki's autobiography that we've all been waiting for since the Jersey Shore days. Yeah. Yeah.
Too funny.
What can you do? But no, that's the good thing. We've got better books like Playboy Laughs. The digital book is out at the start of August, and the hard book is out at the end of August, right?
Right. They moved back the publication date. I think it actually will be out in a couple weeks, but now they're saying the end of August, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. No, Playboy Swings was the first book. We did a previous interview about that. Really happy to talk about Playboy Laughs with Patty Farmer. Congratulations, another great book. And based on what we've said, I'm looking forward to number 3 as well.
Thank you, John, and thank you for, again, letting me talk about one of my most favorite topics.
That's Patty Farmer. I hope you pick up Playboy Laughs. It's available now digitally. And let me just make sure. Yes, I'm looking now. The hardcover edition of Playboy Laughs is available at the end of the month, August 31st. The Kindle edition of Playboy Laughs is currently available. So that's your choice. You can get it digitally or you can get it in the hardcover and wait till the end of the month. But I'm telling you, it's outstanding. I was so pleased to read it. And it is an incredible book, 404 pages of just really interesting information. Playboy Laughs. And also, check out on Amazon Prime, Hugh Hefner, American Playboy. I mentioned that early in the interview with Patty. It's a tremendous docudrama series. It's fun. It, I think, tells the Hefner story. It's an authorized story, but I think there's warts in there, and I don't think they hide from those because it's part of the story. And it's just this incredible combination of a very good drama mixed in with actual documentary-style interviews with all the people that were actually there. From Hefner to all the behind-the-scenes magazine people to former centerfolds and everybody that worked for the magazine, men and women. It's a very, very good docudrama. I can't recommend it enough. Hope you enjoyed today's episode of Word Balloon. It really was. This is one of those subjects that I always enjoy delving in. Mid-century pop culture from the 20th century, I think, is just fascinating. Thanks to our sponsors, InStockTrades.com. Again, the Essential Kurtzman hardcover Volume 2, Trump, the complete collection. Not only the 2 issues that were put out by Hefner, it was a failure magazine, which is a shame, because, again, the star quality people that they had inside the book, including Harvey Kurtzman, Will Elder, Al Jaffe, Jack Davis, Arnold Roth, Russ Heath, Wally Wood, Mel Brooks, plus a great essay and annotations by Dennis Kitchen. It's a great book. I can't recommend it enough. 45% off from In-Stock Trades, $16.49, among a lot of other great books that are happening right now at InStockTrades.com. You go there enough and you check out the comic book stuff. Well, here's something that's part comic book, but also part of a good portion of pop culture in terms of that particular book. Check it out for yourself. Go to InStockTrades.com. Thanks again for listening to Word Balloon today. Thank you, League of Word Balloon listeners, for your continued support. And, back to more of what you come for every week at WordBalloon.com in the days ahead. I'm very excited. I've lined up some really fun guests, a lot of new people, and also some great returning guests. And in particular, coming up very soon, a legend in British comics. Not Alan Moore. Let's wipe that name off. And someone I've never had on Word Balloon before. And I'm so excited to be talking to this man. Should I spoil? All right, I'll spoil. Pat Mills, everybody. The wonderful writer from 2000 AD, the co-creator of Judge Dredd with John Wagner. Man, he's got this incredible... Another guy who just wrote an incredible history about pop culture. This is about the creation of 2000 AD, the things that Pat was working on before he joined the company, the very many creations he had a part in, and others, his observations of the way the British comic book industry worked from the 70s to modern day. So different, vastly different from what we know as far as the American comic book culture. And I love it. I'm enjoying his true history. And then also he's got a novel that he's created with Kevin O'Neill that is a fictionalized look at that same period of time. And pretty interesting, too. Can't wait to have this conversation with Pat. Can't wait to share it with you on Word Balloon, among some other, as I said, new guests and returning guests in the days and weeks ahead. So please come back for the next episode of Word Balloon. Check out the archive, wordballoon.com, and enjoy the hundreds, literally over 600 episodes of Word Balloon over the years. And I'm so happy to share that stuff with you on a weekly basis as well. Wordballoon.com. You can find us on iTunes. You can find me on Stitcher, all the various podcast platforms. If you have questions or comments about the show, you can reach me via email, john@wordballoon.com, and follow me on Twitter @JohnWordBalloon or on Facebook under my name and the Word Balloon Network. Until next time, Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions, copyright 2017.